Stone Pillar. All three of you. 4 counting me and 5 counting Dad, who's going to Sunday school class right now. But before we go to prayer, I do want to talk about what's going on and get this on Facebook. So are we recording this, Jesse? Yeah. So we'll get that out too. But I do want to just try to deal with what we are going through right now, the whole coronavirus thing. I have to admit that this kind of just caught up with me in such a hurry that it almost caught me off guard. And we've been hearing about coronavirus since January, only it's always been way over there in China and Asian countries, and now we are seeing that it has flared up really big in Europe. Italy especially is having some very severe problems, and now I guess Spain has been locked down, and so you've probably been hearing the news. You probably are getting some of this through news sites and through the media outlets, as well as the updates that are coming from President Trump and through our government, through our governor here in Michigan. And so we need to address this. We need to talk about it. And so I wanted to bring it up today. Here at Stone Pillar, we've talked about whether to even cancel today. And some of you decided that we needed to be here at least one more Sunday. And so we are open today. But I do want to warn you, keep you in mind, or have you keep in mind that possibly next week or the week after that, we will cancel service, or at least not do it here. If we can find a way, maybe I can it might just be, again, Jesse and me and Ken and Jonathan. We might just come in and do a recording so that you can catch this on Facebook or catch the recorded version. Is it on Facebook? Is where you find it?
These are on YouTube.
These are YouTube. Okay. So you have a link on Facebook, but the link takes you to YouTube, and this is the recorded version of that. So very possible next week we may only have it over YouTube and over Facebook. So keep that in mind. I do want to just say it again. I hear people, I talk to people, read stuff, and a lot of people are saying, well, this is just some kind of a conspiracy, this is overhyped and overreacted, and there's truth to the notion that this coronavirus is no worse, no more dangerous, I should say, no more deadly than the common flu that goes through our country every year. The annual flu bug that millions of people contract it, and thousands of people actually die from it every year. And it doesn't get a lot of attention because this happens every year. And this has gotten a lot of attention because it is something new, and they are saying, and we have seen in other countries, that people are less immune to this naturally, because it is a novel virus, the coronavirus. Although strains of this have been going around the world for decades, it's not really totally new. But we do need to keep some things in mind, and that is what our government is trying to do, is that they are trying to not, we can't stop it from coming. It has come, it is in our country, and it will do like our normal virus that goes through, and it's possible that 10-20% of our population will contract the virus, and that's going to happen. What they are trying to stop is for having everybody catch it at the same time. And so that's what this chart is about, that you've probably seen this and heard people talk about flattening the curve. And this is not hype. This is not conspiracy. This is this makes sense. We need to pay attention to this. And that's why we are practicing a lot of the things that we are. Is that we want to slow down the contagiousness of this virus and keep it from affecting everybody all at once. So we want to avoid that spike, the high curve, because once we get across that dotted line represents our capacity as our healthcare systems to deal with this. And so that's why we are doing what we can to slow down the spread. And so I'm in agreement. I know it seems like overreaction, and it seems like, well, why are they closing down schools? Why are they closing down businesses and workplaces and sports? Oh my goodness, that's got to be the most difficult thing of all to deal with. Well, I'm in agreement with what they are doing because we do not want to get above that dotted line, which we have seen in other countries. Italy has been a case in point in that we want to avoid getting to the place where everybody gets sick at the same time, and the few that will have more serious symptoms, if they all go to the doctor or all go to the hospital at the same time, then we will be in difficulty and won't be able to treat as many people, and it's possible more people will die because of that. And so we want to avoid that. We want to avoid spreading this to especially high-risk people. And you've probably read, you know, that the higher risk individuals are those that are over 60, those that are dealing with heart disease, lung disease, or diabetes. And they are just highly recommending that they stay away from any crowds at all, which could include our church services. So I just want us to know that I am in agreement with what they are doing, and I think we should cooperate. Now, so far, our governor has not restricted churches, although the latest bulletin that came out, I believe it was Friday, that said, maybe this was yesterday's, yeah, this is Friday, that she is temporarily restricting or prohibiting any gatherings over 250 people. So far that has not affected us at Stone Pillar. We might be close to that sometime, but yeah, and even here at Heart Wesleyan, we are not too worried about bumping the 250 mark, at least not right now. So we are still trying to comply, and I want you to know I am watching this, I am reading all the bulletins, I get the updates, and you can get them too. You can go to michigan.gov/coronavirus, and you can see how many cases have come out in the last 24 hours. They update that every night. And so if you look at last night's report, we are up to 33 cases in Michigan and 26 pending tests to see. And so hopefully it's looking like, and we'll see how it goes this week, it's looking like we may not have a huge outbreak. And maybe some of the things that they are doing right now are already starting to slow down the spread of this. So, and I just keep wanting to emphasize, we do not need to be afraid. We do not need to fear this virus. It is no worse than normal. There are symptoms, and it can become serious. It is a respiratory virus, and so it can get in your lungs, and it can cause a secondary infection such as pneumonia or bronchitis. And so that's normal. That happens with flu every year, but we do need to keep an eye on that. So I do want to go along with what's going on with the things that are going on and being told to us. We're avoiding handshakes. We're doing a little bit of distancing, no contact, covering up coughs and sneezes, of course. Diligent hand washing. Don't touch your face with unwashed hands. there's nothing that makes me want to scratch my eyes more than hear somebody say, don't touch your face. All of a sudden my eyes itch. So I know that it's difficult, but we need to do our best with that. Face masks do not help. Don't go out and buy a bunch of face masks. The only good that they do is if you are infected and you are sick, they keep that from spreading out. But it won't keep you from getting in. So if you're worried about getting sick and you buy a face mask for that, it won't help. And if you are sick, just don't go out. Don't come here. Don't go to public places. Don't spread it. And so that's what they're saying right now. So I recommend we follow those guidelines, as well as the higher risks for older adults. We need to remind them that if they want to avoid crowds, and especially if they don't want to come to church, that's okay. And people that are in contact with them a lot also need to think about whether they should come and be a part of a social gathering. So I say these things also that we do not judge other people and other churches. I know a lot of churches are closing down, and we are probably tempted to say, well, we aren't going to close because we're not going to let the government shut us down, and we're not going to let this hype bother us, and bring on that virus. Let's see. Well, I know we can feel that way, but we don't need to. We don't need to judge other people if they decide not to come or if other churches close, and we should realize that that's going to happen, and we may close too. I'm telling you that I'm watching the outbreak. So far it's been mostly isolated to eastern, southern Michigan, and one or two cases in Kent County.
One that I was aware of.
One that you knew of in Kent County, Grand Rapids. So as it makes its way across the state and into our region, I very likely will just cancel services. And we may try to go online or try to do it live, or I may just say, look, a snow day, let's just cancel and not have services. And I am canceling any other activities other than Sunday morning. So there will be no Sunday night services, unless you hear differently, no Sunday nights, and no Wednesday soup, supper, and clothing closet over there in the fellowship hall. We just really want to avoid that kind of close activity, because our little fellowship hall, we tend to get a lot of people in there. We're serving food, a lot of kids running around, a lot of face-to-face and physical contact. So we, just like the schools, are going to close our clothing closet until April 8th will be the next Wednesday night that we will have activities at the clothing closet. So I think that's covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover with that. Jesse or Ken, did you have anything to add to that?
Only that the local health department has only issued up 2 kits for testing for coronavirus. Both of them have come back negative.
Okay. So
That was on the Oceana County Press.
Okay, in Oceana County, 2 people have been tested, but they've come back negative so far. That's good to know.
Britt Floyd was going to be in Grand Rapids April 8th, and they canceled.
Who?
Britt Floyd.
Oh.
Yeah, I got tickets.
No. We're all going to suffer. I mean, come on, sports. No March Madness.
My son won tickets.
Can you imagine that? Oh, there was one thing I wanted to mention. Another reason why this is being so careful, maybe to the point of going overboard, is that we know, here, I just touched my nose, can you believe that? We know that with this virus and any other virus, in fact, you can be contagious, you can contract the virus and still have no symptoms, feel just fine for 3, 5, 7 days. And then, in that time, you can infect other people before you even feel any symptoms. So that's one reason why viruses are always like this, and it goes around every year, and that's why it spreads so fast. So that's another reason why it just seems like we're overreacting when really we're just being careful. We're being considerate to those that are most vulnerable, and we are trying our best to help out our health systems so that they are not overwhelmed, so that we do not look like Italy does right now. And they are containing it. They're going to be fine, but their hospitals and their systems were just overwhelmed. And so they had to go to a total lockdown. And hopefully we do not have to do that. And if we observe these mitigation guidelines, then hopefully we won't have to do that in the next few weeks. In fact, one thing I read said that if this works, our overreaction works, everybody will look back and say, oh, you overreacted. This was nothing. But the people who did this are going to say, that's what we want. We want you to think that we overreacted. Because if we don't overreact, then you're going to say, well, why didn't you take care of this when we had a chance? And so we have a chance, and we're going to do our best to avoid a spike in this outbreak.
Hey Bob, the guys with diabetes and stuff, they can catch it easier?
Not that they can catch it easier, although they probably can, but it could affect them worse.
They're worse.
They could get these secondary infections like pneumonia.
I heard.
I'm not sure why diabetes is on the list, but I can understand heart and lung disease, because
Respiratory stuff.
that could definitely result in pneumonia. Okay, well, I totally intended this to be a really short service today, but we're actually going really longer than normal because I'm just not getting to the lesson. So I will try to keep this lesson a short one today, but it's a good one, very appropriate for what we're going through and what's going on. And so we need to keep up our faith in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of storms and trials. And we've been talking about that, how God tested Abraham last week, that God himself tested Abraham to help him realize that the relationship with God is much more important than the blessings of God. And so God tested him and said, you need to give back your son, the promise, because the giver is more important than the gift. And so Abraham learned that lesson. This week we're going on to Joseph, skipping down to verse 22 in Hebrews chapter 11. It says, by faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. And I just find that fascinating, that of all the things to talk about of Joseph, and we know his story and his life, the Hebrew writer was most interested in the fact that Joseph said, take my bones back to the promised land. He said, I'm not going to make it there, I'm not going to get there. And in fact, we know that Joseph served in Egypt for a long time, and brought his family to Egypt, and that they grew and multiplied, and over 400 years they stayed in Egypt before they ever got back to the promised land. But somehow Joseph knew by faith that he was going back to the promised land. Not alive, but at least his bones were going to make it there. And he just felt it. And so I made that the title of today's lesson. He felt it in his bones. Just the fact that the Hebrew writer is so fascinated by this fact that he was sure that his bones would make it back to the promised land. In fact, that meant that his whole family, that the Israelites, would make it back. So that's where we need to be today. And that's what I would ask you today. Do you feel it in your bones? Do you know, beyond a doubt, that God is in control. We're in a situation. We are in hard times. And when we go through things like this, and whether it's hyped up or not, you still have to have faith. Now, Joseph went through a lot worse than we are going through, but he finished well, and that's what the Hebrew writer says down towards the end of his life. He still knew this. He finished so well that he knew it in his bones. He knew God would be faithful to his people, to his family, even after he died. So that's why he knew that his bones would be making it back to the promised land. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel this too, and I've felt it this week. It's been a bad week. I just, like I said earlier, this caught up with me so fast. I'm like, whoa! Why are we overreacting? Why are we doing all this? And I'm thinking, oh no, closing schools now, closing sports, and my kids are at college and they're telling them no classes, and you got to go online, and I'm thinking, well, are they going to come home? And the stock market, oh my goodness, phew! Yeah, talk about you need some Dramamine just to stay awake. I would recommend you don't even look at your 401ks for the next month because it's going to be up and down. Don't worry about it. But I worry about things like that. And then when we came down to the end of the week, Friday, and we're talking about closing churches. And the governor's saying, don't go out into crowds and don't do this. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're only 3 weeks away from Easter. God, what are you doing? And look at us today, only a couple of people here today. And I'm hoping people will catch this online because we need to be thinking that way. And this might be a good thing. We're learning how to do stuff like this. But I felt like this all week long. And then I look at the story of Joseph and I think, well, I'm having a bad week. He had a long time that was really bad. And yet he did not give up on God. He knew that even though God allows bad things to happen, that he can turn them into good. That's the faith lesson of Joseph. That's the one I really want us to get today. After all the bad things that happened to him, slavery, he was sold into Egyptian slavery, he was falsely accused in Potiphar's house, thrown into prison, and spent all that time here. And I'm worried about a bad week. Come on. Maybe I'm just preaching to myself today. And Joseph came through all that, and he maintained his faith because he felt it in his bones, because it was so deep. That's what I want to get at today. Our faith needs to go that deep that nothing on the surface is going to affect it. So I want to skip down to the end of Joseph's life, like the Hebrew writer does. And we're going to skip way down to the end of Genesis, chapter 50. And as he gets through all these things that have happened to him, and he finally gets to the palace, and he's finally in control, second in command of Egypt, and his brothers show up later, begging for food because of the famine in Israel, and he has a chance to get even with them, and he doesn't do it. And then Joseph's father dies, and the whole family, all the brothers, are again worried. Is Joseph going to hold a grudge against us? Look what he says in Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 20. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died." I love the way Dad said this, so don't be mad, Joseph. "This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of God your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." I love that verse 20. I think it is the most amazing verse in the Old Testament, because it is the Old Testament version of Romans 8:28. You intended this for evil, but God intends it for good. And what does Romans 8:28 say? Look at the next slide. "And we know that in all things God works for good of those who love him, those who have been called according to his purpose." And so the faith lesson that we learn from Joseph is that God will turn bad into good. And it doesn't matter how bad it gets. It doesn't matter how long it is. It doesn't matter. If you have faith, God will turn bad into good. He has a purpose, and we don't always know what that is, but he does. And so I want us to look at that, but I want us to look at the life of Joseph. And as we look back over the life of Joseph, I won't read all of the life of Joseph, but referring to some of the stories of Joseph, there are some things that we learn about his faith. And this idea that God will turn anything bad into good. However, there's some howevers involved here when you look at the story of Joseph. However, number one, it may take a while. And this is where it's hard for me, it's hard for us. We're Americans, and you know, we want this coronavirus wiped out now. Where is that vaccine? Come on, it should be here. And we know it takes longer than that. We were talking about that earlier this morning. You can't just develop a vaccine in 3 weeks. It takes months. And by the time it's ready, this will be over, right? It always happens that way. And we want an instant fix. We want things taken care of. And we do that with God. God, what are you doing? How come you can't fix this right now? And God has a reason. Sometimes he says, I don't want to fix this right now because I know something better is going to come out of this. And it's going to take some time. Joseph did not have a clue. He was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery, when his brothers threw him into a pit. And all he could probably think about is, am I going to live through this pit? Are they going to leave me here to die? And yet he still had this faith. And so he's taken out of the pit, and he's sold into slavery, and he ends up in Potiphar's house. And here he is, a 17-year-old boy, and for 13 years, it's 13 years between the time he's sold into slavery until the time he finally makes it to the palace. He has this, he interprets the dream for Pharaoh and is taken out of prison. But in the meantime, he goes from the pit to Potiphar's house, and from Potiphar's house to prison, because he was falsely accused. Potiphar's wife tried to tempt him and then accused him. And it was not fair. I mean, how many times have you said that too? This isn't fair, God. He was totally innocent. And yet he ends up in prison. And he spends more than 2 years in prison because of this false accusation. And even while he's in prison, the story fascinates me. He's in prison, and he interprets the dreams of these two servants of the king. And one of them says, I'll go and tell the king about this, that you interpreted my dream. And it came out right. And so false hope comes up. He says, oh, good, maybe I'll get out of this. And then the cupbearer goes back to serve in the king's palace, and another 2 years go by. it says in Genesis, 41:1, it says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. And you got to think, what is going through the mind of Joseph during those 2 years? I thought I was going to get out of here. And I would imagine that he would be tempted. I don't know. It doesn't say. But if I were him, and we have the words of Jesus himself, my God, why have you forsaken me? Have you ever felt that? I have. Even sometimes this week, I just felt like, oh God, why are you doing this? And yet, my bad week is nothing compared to what Joseph went through, nothing compared to what Jesus went through when he cried out those words from the cross. Yet, Joseph did not give in to fear. He did not give in to despair. And this is because he felt it in his bones, okay? He had a faith that went way down deep. Even as a 17-year-old boy. And for 13 years that it took to get from the pit to the palace, he did not give up on God. So it may take a while. And number 2, it may lead through temptation. This is a really good lesson. You might feel like if you're going through this time, that 13 years, he might have been thinking to himself, well, where is God in all this? Where are you, God? Why have you allowed this to happen, but where are you? And Joseph was sold into slavery into Egypt, taken a long way from home, away from his parents, away from his family, away from his church, if you want to call it that, away from him teaching on God. He didn't have a Bible with him. I still am amazed. How did he maintain his faith when he was so distanced from his roots, from his family, from God? And you wonder sometimes again if maybe he felt like God wasn't there. And so we feel that too. And sometimes when we feel this and we say, well, where are you, God? If you're not going to be here, why should I stay faithful? If you've abandoned me, why shouldn't I abandon you? And we run into temptations like that. And it says in Genesis chapter 39, tells a story about Potiphar's wife, how she very openly and blatantly tempted Joseph. She said to him, come to bed with me. And it says in verse 10, it says, day after day she said it. We don't know exactly how long this went on. But sometime during that, it's probably 8 or 9, maybe 10 years that he was in Potiphar's house. Sometime during there was an extended period of temptation. And surely, Joseph, I don't know, I'm going to put it this way. Surely Satan must have whispered in Joseph's ear, why not? Why not, Joseph? I mean, where's God? Come on, he's not here. Obviously, he's abandoned you. Why would you stay true to him? Why not give in, Joseph? I mean, you're a slave. Hey, here's a chance to enjoy your life a little bit and get some pleasure back after all the things you've gone through. Joseph, you deserve this. Oh my goodness, we tell ourselves things like that. When we are down, when we are depressed, when we're tired, when it feels like God is not there, seems like maybe he's letting us down, that's when we are the most vulnerable to temptation. And Satan whispers in our ears, why not? Why not? After all, you've gone through all this, you deserve something back. And if God's not there, then why should you be faithful to him. But Joseph answers her. He says, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? He's still more worried about God than anything else. His faith goes right to the bone. It goes way down deep. And even with years away from God and home, Joseph feels it. He feels like God is still here. God is still being faithful. So I will be faithful too. So it may take a while. It may lead through temptation. And here's the third one, and I don't want you to get too discouraged, but here's the really bad news, is it may never come out totally right in this life. Oh no, Pastor Bob, why do you have to say that? It may never work out. We may never see God turn something really bad into something good. We might just have to have faith that He's doing it, whether you can see it or not. He's doing His plan, whether you know it or not. And you may never see the final results of what God is doing until we get to heaven. That's the point, I believe, that the Hebrew writer is making up when he says that Joseph had faith, and by faith believed that God was going to carry out His faithfulness even after he died. Joseph never got back home. Can you imagine that? When he was sold into slavery, sent to Egypt, and lived in Potiphar's house, for all those years, the only thing that must have been going through his mind is, God, I want to go back home. When will I get back home? When can I go back to my family? When can I get back to my land and the people? He never made it. God never told him, okay, don't worry, Joseph, I'll get you back home. He never got there in his lifetime. His bones did, and he knew it. He knew in his bones that his bones would make it back to the promised land. And that was good enough for him. He didn't have to worry that everything was going to work exactly right in his lifetime. In fact, if you count up the years, that from age 17 to age 30, he was in slavery and in Potiphar's house and in prison. And then from age 30, he served in Pharaoh's palace for another 80 years. Or it says at least until he died. He died at the age of 110.
Whoa.
80 years. That's a long time, isn't it? How long are you going to live, Jonathan? You're going to be 80 years old? You want to work for 80 years? Well, he served God in Egypt for 80 years, but he never made it back home. And that was okay with him, because he knew, this is not my home, this is not where I want to be, but someday God is going to take my people back. God will take my family, God will take my descendants, and the descendants of my brothers, and of my father Isaac, and Jacob, and Abraham, and He's going to take all of us back home. Not even Joseph knew that it was going to be a 400-year wait, but he knew in his bones that it was going to work out someday. We can believe that too. We believe that what God is doing and what we're going through today, even in this lifetime, if we never see everything we want to see, God is still doing His work. Someday we will see it. Someday we will get there. We will be in heaven. That's what I want to bring to conclusion this morning, the last thing. Our faith is that we know God will turn bad into good. We can take that faith down deep. Feel it in your bones. It might take a while. It might lead through temptation, and it will. And it may not totally work out in this lifetime, in this world. That's okay, because this is not my home. This world is not my home. And God is going to take our bones. He's going to take what's left of us, literally our spirit, our soul, to be with Him in heaven. And we will see the results. And we can be like Joseph and feel it in our bones. So as we go through the next few weeks, and I scratch my head and I worry and I think, what are we going to do as a church? And are we going to be open for Easter? And I think, oh my goodness, if we do flatten the curve, which will prolong the whole outbreak, right? You slow it down, but prolong it. Does that mean we're going to be still stuck in this come Easter time? And okay, just don't worry. God is on the throne. He's doing what He's doing. And something good will come out of this, whether we see it or not. We feel it in our bones, don't we? Good, Jonathan. I'm glad you're feeling it right down there in your bones. Don't feel it in your lungs. That might be the coronavirus, but you feel it in your bones. Well, let's pray. Would you stand with me and we'll close in prayer. Our Father, we are grateful again for the story of Joseph and for the word that we get from you this morning to hang in there, to not give up on you, even if you feel distant, even if bad things happen, even when we're tempted. Lord, help us to be faithful and to keep our faith. Help it to go way down deep, where the things of this world can't affect it, where the surface things like this coronavirus and our media and the reaction that's going on in the world today, don't let all of these things lose our faith or affect our faith. Help us to keep it way down deep where it belongs. And Lord, as we go from this place, give us strength and energy. And for those that are watching online, I pray that you will bless this congregation, bless our family, bless our families, and be with us in the weeks ahead. And we pray this in Jesus' name.